Speaker number 4, Philip Price. Please come forward.
I'd like to thank you and I congratulate you.
Thank you.
You are the most articulate and the most charming chairman of the 4 chairmen that I've known. Ladies, isn't he a good-looking guy? Just a good-looking guy. Okay? Now, we're going to be real nice to Mr. Rhea.
Did my mother pay you to say that?
No. This guy did, the housing whistleblower.
Okay, all right.
I'm that guy.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I spoke to Constance Roberthan. This retaliation against me to destroy my life, can it please stop? I'm a remaining family member. Right now, I've been beating up Byron Metakakis in Supreme Court so bad, this is for you. I just beat him up that fast.
Got it. Okay. So.
This is the rent strike I'm orchestrating against NYC. Because we don't do that.
Okay. You should move to the next one.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have 1 minute and 40 seconds. 3 things. Number 1, the retaliation against the whistleblower. If an old lady is embezzled by an employee out of $20,858, Ricardo Elias Morales calls my boss, who I work for at a law firm, and tell me to tell them to leave alone. I left them alone, but you don't leave the old lady in the apartment with the gas stove on for 4 hours, and then you orchestrate a retaliation scheme against me with a containment apparatus that destroyed my life, cost my business over $4.5 million, $100,000 for antiques taken out of my home. I'm a Haitian French Orthodox Roman Catholic. I leave people alone. I don't bother anybody. But the kind of compassion that it takes to see what I'm seeing is just humane. It's nothing special. Another thing, criminal neglect. I don't understand this. You mean to tell me you got 2 lawyers in 2 different courts and both of them have a different story about an supposed exclusive senior development that is not? Another one. When you deceive the judges, you deceive the courts, and I bring that to you. The Veterans Administration asked Congress to speak to call in state and federal law enforcement. Ida Smith says, you even got a call recently about May Keys, where they said NYCHA is conducting a form of redlining. Those 21 developments, I believe, were part of the Davis versus NYCHA, that it was found that NYCHA was conducting a form of redlining. Are we still on the same page here? And I'm done.
Mr. Price, we'll have somebody come over and speak to you. Okay, specific to your concerns. Speaker number 5, Carmen Quinones.
Hi, how are you?
Mike's coming.
My name is Carmen Quinones. Actually, I'm a former Democratic district leader for a lot of developments, which I still advocate everything. But I am from Douglas Houses. First, I want to tell you, welcome.
Thank
and
you.
I'm sorry that you're getting beat up, but NYCHA has done so much to people that we don't know who to believe anymore, which is sad. I want to tell you that, though, Gloria, hi, because you have always been very helpful to me. And Margarita Lopez, always there, presente. But what I want to tell you is that there are so many things wrong that people don't want to believe anything. That's where we're at here. I think that your presentation, beautiful. But even to get here, I couldn't even get down because my elevator was broke. So I had to come down 15 steps, get on the train, and come to see you, baby.
Okay. All right. So, listen, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
After my 2 minutes, you can tell me whatever you want.
No, I thought
Okay.
it was about elevators.
My concern is that we have a lot a lot of seniors in our development, a lot. We also have a lot of youth. They don't know what to do. They have nothing to do, so they're loitering. They're hanging. Our seniors are scared to come out. They're scared to come out. These developments have become hazardous. Your elevators, I am so tired of them coming and putting a Band-Aid on that elevator and that Band-Aid falling off in 2 seconds. So I understand where you're going, and I know that we need the money because we too are underfunded in our development. We need more maintenance workers, and I hear you. All I'm just asking you is to bear with them, bear with everybody here, because everybody is not going to be nice. But I just want you to know that I'm here for you. We're here for you.
Thank you.
All right?
Absolutely. So, first of all, thank you.
Operations at the New York City Housing Authority. We have sign language interpreters for the hearing impaired on the stage, and Spanish, Russian, and Chinese translators for those that need it in the audience. Will the interpreters please come to the microphone to identify yourselves?
Ofrecemos servicios de interpretación en español. Si necesitan, por favor, de salir al lobby para recibir el equipo de audio. Muchas gracias.
Добрый вечер, переводчик русского языка Ирина. Пожалуйста, если у вас есть какие-то вопросы, обращайтесь в правую часть нашего зала.
大會今晚有安排廣東話嘅翻譯服務，有需要嘅人士請出外領取耳機。大會今晚有安排國語的翻譯服務，有需要人士請出外領取耳機，謝謝。
Remington Low, Chinese interpreter, 羅明登，翻譯廣東話。
The purpose of this town hall meeting is to share with you the final components of the New York City Housing Authority Mixed Finance Modernization Plan to secure ongoing federal funding for the long-term capital and operating needs of the 21 city and state-built developments. Federalization, or the Mixed Finance Modernization Plan, will provide for certain immediate and necessary rehabilitation work at these 21 developments. It will also ensure additional dedicated funds for all 334 NYCHA developments. That means more money to pay for the things that your development needs to keep the buildings operating safely and soundly. The purpose of the town hall meeting tonight is for you to hear how the efforts will improve your development and preserve public housing for the future. Tonight, we will have the following NYCHA representatives here on the dais to hear and answer your questions. They are NYCHA Chairman John B. Rea, Vice Chairman Earl Andrews Jr., Commissioner Margarita Lopez, General Manager Michael P. Kelly, and Deputy General Manager for Operations Gloria Finkelman. We hope that as many people as possible will have an opportunity to provide comments this evening. So before we begin, let's go over the following ground rules. If you wish to speak, first you must fill out a speaker's slip. They are available in the entrance area at the table marked Speaker Sign-In. Please line up at each of the microphones in the center aisles and wait your turn to speak. Each speaker is allowed 3 minutes to speak. On the stage, you will see a timer with 3 lights. When you begin to speak, the green light will be on and the timer will begin to count down. When the yellow light is lit, it means that you should start to conclude your remarks. When the red light is turned on, your 3 minutes to provide comments are over. A table has been set up outside so the written comments may also be submitted. Numbered speaker slips are non-transferable, and you are not present or do not wish to speak with your name and number is called, you will forfeit the opportunity to speak. The hearing is being recorded and transcribed by a stenographer, so please speak only from the microphone in the aisles and identify yourself and your development or affiliation. Remember, we are here to discuss the Mixed Finance Modernization Plan. Any personal comments on criticism of or oral attacks on NYCHA personnel, resident representatives, and public attendees, or any demeaning, discriminatory, or ethnic slurs or vulgar language will not be tolerated. I, as the moderator, and this evening's meeting, reserve the right to immediately move on to the next speaker online if any comments are deemed inappropriate. The moderator on the stage is in charge of the town hall. Please be considerate of your neighbors and obey the moderator's directions. We are here to consider issues that are of concern to everyone, not issues that concern only a single resident or individual. If you have an issue that concerns only you or your apartment, we have tables set up outside specifically for those purposes. You may find out a resident response form at the table. You may fill out a resident response form at the table marked resident complaints. The passing out of materials, photo taking, video recording are not allowed in the auditorium. However, a general information station is available outside where leaflets and flyers may be displayed. Resource tables have been set up outside with information so that at the end of the meeting you can pick up information that may be of interest to you on resident employment services, fair housing, social services, citywide programs, health providers, and information on the census. With that being said, let me introduce John B. Rea, Chairman of the New York City Housing Authority.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here this evening, and I appreciate everybody taking time out of your schedules to join us. And it's really good to be up here on the stage with my fellow leadership team and Commissioner Lopez and Vice Chairman Andrews, General Manager Kelly, who many of you have had the chance to meet already, and Deputy General Manager Gloria Finkelman. We are pretty excited about the opportunity that's presented itself related to the federalization opportunity. You know, I think I originally started to communicate with many of the leadership, tenant leaders in November about the possibility of making federalization a reality. This is a topic that has been discussed for quite some time, for the better part of a decade, on how to ensure that these 21 city and state developments that are just like every other NYCHA development around the city, you know, filled with wonderful tenants who make New York City the wonderful place it is, but who didn't seem to get the same fair shake that the rest of the developments were getting in terms of the support that they deserve for both capital improvements as well as ongoing operating maintenance and support to ensure that they'll be around for another 75 years. And a lot of people worked hard to try various ways to make the federalization a possibility. And as those of you who've been through the wars know, that was everything from judicial relief to try and get the courts to attach some form of support to the development, to legislatively in Washington, and then now through this transactional approach. And the other, despite a lot of hard work on the parts of many, and particularly Senator Chuck Schumer and Congresswoman Velasquez, who've been working on this for more than a decade, please. They deserve a round of applause. They absolutely do. But they actually were extremely instrumental into getting us to where we are today. If it weren't for the two of them, not only would we not have built the kind of momentum around this federalization effort, but the money that's been put into the budget in Washington to support the federalization would not have been a reality. So I know so many people have worked hard, and this morning I was with many of your leaders from the Citywide Council of Presidents, including Reginald Bowman, and he really gave you know, some background here on how hard people have worked for a long time to try and make this federalization a reality. So I'm excited tonight because we're here to say that we will have federalization for these 21 city and state developments. Not just that we are proposing it and we're pursuing it, but that it is actually a reality. This morning we had a press conference in which the mayor, along with Senator Schumer and Congresswoman Velasquez and the governor, Assemblyman Lopez and Speaker Silver, and in the Senate, leadership Sampson and Daniel Squadron, we were all there together to announce what is really a historic day in terms of getting what will amount to, just to put it in perspective, the 20,000 plus units in the 21 city and state developments with over 40,000 residents would be the third largest housing authority in the country on a standalone basis. I want to repeat that. It would be the third largest housing authority if it was a housing authority on its own. The New York, then Chicago, and then this entity. So it's very important that we recognize and we take a minute and reflect on why it's been such a challenge to get these units federalized and to get funding for them, and it's because it requires a substantial amount of money on an annual basis to be put into the appropriations budget in Washington to support them. And given that it benefits New York and not any other states, that's a tough thing to get through a legislative process in Washington. And so we owe a lot to those of you who fought really hard for it and to those who were able to get appropriation funding for it. And so we celebrated or announced this morning that we were doing this, and the whole purpose of it is to ensure that public housing is preserved in New York City. Without preserving these 20,000 units, it runs the risk of not being able to preserve all of public housing in New York. And there are obvious reasons for that. First and foremost, having to drain money away from other developments to support the 21 city and state developments just means that the entire public housing portfolio within New York is not receiving the resources it needs to be preserved. And as I've said from the day that I was lucky enough to be appointed by the mayor, the number one risk to public housing in New York is not that people don't believe that it has value, it's that if we don't get enough money to continue to maintain the buildings, then ultimately the preservation is at risk because the buildings aren't being maintained. And we've seen that happen in other places in the country, throughout the country. So this is about preservation first and foremost. And I said that this morning. It's about ensuring that the families who live in these 20,000 plus units can maintain their residency and be proud of the place that they live in because it's getting the investments and the resources in terms of ongoing maintenance and staffing that it needs. It's about innovation because we had to find a way out of the ordinary, traditional way to ensure that there was support for these buildings from a financial standpoint and to raise the money that is going to go immediately into investing in these buildings today. And that's the mixed financing modernization program in which we had to put both public dollars with private dollars in order to invest in the rehabilitation work. And it's about collaboration. There are a lot of people, as I said, who really should deserve all the credit for being able to get the federalization over the finish line. In addition to the elected officials, a lot of advocates, housing advocates have been supportive of this, came into the process early to understand and ensure that residents' rights would be protected. And also, there are a lot of partners across the city. The state had to pass legislation in order to facilitate this. After the state passed the legislation, the governor had to sign it. We also needed a lot of help from our partners in city government. HDC, the Housing Development Corporation, is helping us issue the financing, as well as Housing Preservation and Development, and then also the private sector, Citibank, City Community Capital, that's putting up not only $200 million of tax credit equity into the transaction, but is also providing other support for the credit. So a lot of people, a lot of entities had to collaborate to make this happen, not the least of which is the NYCHA team that's worked really hard to make sure that this happened. And this morning, to emphasize how important this was, the Secretary of HUD, Sean Donovan, was here in New York to announce this and to sign the documents to make this a reality. And he was here basically representing President Obama, and he was here to discuss why this has been so important to invest in public housing in this administration in Washington, and that given that President Obama got his start organizing in public housing in Chicago, one of his first commitments was to ensure that public housing is preserved across the country, and to demonstrate that by actually speaking with the most powerful way he can, which is to ensure that there's money available and that he put the best person in the job to in HUD, in Sean Donovan, to ensure that we have the kind of support and understanding in Washington that New Yorkers need, and particularly residents of public housing. So a lot of people at the highest levels of this country are basically supporting this effort. And when things like this happen, it's worth us taking a minute to note that it's only because of the hard work of so many of the 400,000 people who live in public housing demanding and advocating for support that gets us to this point. And I think, I'm not here to preach, but I am here to kind of give credit where it's due. And it's really due to each and every one of you in this room and the members of public housing who have fought this long battle for quite some time. It's interesting that Reggie Bowman said something earlier today at the press conference. He said it was about a year ago today, which was before I arrived, that a similar group was organized or gathered at Rutgers houses where the press conference was this morning, and which is one of the developments that's going to benefit from the federalization. And he mentioned that the group was organized to go down to Washington and demand additional resources to support NYCHA and public housing in New York. And it's great to be able to stand here a year later and to say that your voices were heard. So with that, I want to get into the specific slides and talk about what it means and what it doesn't mean. But what it certainly means is that your voices have been heard and your leadership is working hard to try to make a difference in your daily lives. So I'm going to need you to turn this on. It's gone off.
Andy Nagy?
Okay, yeah. I see a gentleman with his hand up. Can you just hold your question? We're going to get the questions in a little bit, so we'll thanks. So I know I met with many of you in various forums to discuss this throughout the process. We started this effort back in the late summer to try to understand whether or not the stimulus legislation that was passed by President Obama created an opportunity for us to get the 21 city and state developments federalized. So we started this work at the very early stages just to understand whether or not legally there was an opportunity to use the stimulus funding to facilitate the federalization effort. And so we started this conversation then, and since that time there's been a series of meetings with various interested parties, elected tenant leadership, as well as tenant with the residents of the affected developments, and we had a larger town hall meeting where all of NYCHA was invited to understand what we were proposing. So I know for many of you this won't be the first time you've seen this information, and I'm going to try to go through it quickly so we can get to the questions that are on your mind. But as I said, it's the stimulus legislation, the Recovery Act, that provided a one-time exception that would allow NYCHA to get the city and state developments into the HUD funding formula. And the reason is there's a limitation on adding new public housing to the funding formula. It's called the Faircloth Amendment, and it prohibits housing authorities from adding new units to the funding formula. And therefore, NYCHA could not take the units in the 21 city and state developments and add them into the federal funding formula. But the stimulus legislation basically said money could be spent to preserve, rehabilitate, and acquire new housing, and that the limitations that the Faircloth Amendment had actually wouldn't apply. And so that's the most important element of this, is that President Obama's and the Congress's Stimulus Act provided a one-time opportunity for the federalization to take place. But it also said that the stimulus dollars had to be spent, obligated, committed on the same timelines that the rest of the stimulus money had to be spent, which means we had to have it fully obligated, committed in contracts by March 17th of this year, so a couple of days from now, Wednesday, and then it has to all be spent by March of 2012. So we have 2 years in order to do all of the rehabilitation work. And so that put us under a very tight timeline in order to get the federalization approved before March 17th. If we didn't get this done by Wednesday, then we would have lost the one-time opportunity and it wasn't coming back. So we were under very, very tight deadlines. It also said that there need to be a minimum of at least $2,000 spent on average per apartment in order for it to qualify as substantial rehabilitation work, as they define rehab work. As we'll go through, we worked really hard with HUD to make sure that they didn't mean we literally had to spend $2,000 in each apartment, because if we did, there's just no way we could get this work done in 2 years. We would have to, go into people's apartments, in some cases ask people to, move out. We knew that that was not logistically possible in the 2-year time frame. And so we were able to get HUD to agree that as long as we spent $2,000 on average, when you divided the number of apartments into the buildings, and we spent, the money on the buildings, that would qualify as $2,000 per apartment. So if there's 1,000 units in a development and we have to do $2,000 per apartment, we have to spend $2 million on that development in order for it to qualify. So we immediately decided to focus on things that would not ask you or require you to move out of your apartment, but there would be things that everyone would benefit from, like elevators, like roof jobs, like brickwork, like plumbing and heating systems that obviously we could get the work done on the appropriate timeline. And then lastly, that all of the units, in order to be accepted into the portfolio and to be funded, would have to meet HUD's minimum physical condition standards. And that meant, that's basically how we made a decision on what work we were going to do at what buildings, because as you all know, there's a fast scoring process that tells us, what at those buildings need to be done in order to receive a passing grade. And so because we had recently done the FADS work, we were able to go building by building and understand what work needed to be done in order to get them up to acceptable standards to be part of the federal portfolio. So those were the requirements that we had to meet. Obviously, all very challenging to make them all mesh together. We set some basic requirements from the beginning. When we looked at this, we said it's very important that we not do anything that actually jeopardizes the status of tenants, or that in any way jeopardizes the long-term status of these buildings as low-income, affordable public housing. And so we set out a couple of requirements for ourselves in order to pursue this as a reasonable plan. The first one is that, that your rights needed to be protected. We wanted to make sure that no one was relocated as part of this process, and that families would continue to benefit as public housing residents with all the protections that they are used to, whether that be rent schedules or other protections in terms of your tenancy. Secondly, we needed to know that the private money that we would bring into and the private partners who would participate in this process would be committed to public housing as you all know it, and not ask us to convert it into something different, and to recognize that what we needed was capital from them and their commitment to preservation. And so we went out to 3 different banking institutions, and ultimately, as you'll hear, we settled on City Community Capital, both because of how aggressive they were with respect to the funding sources that they would provide us on terms that were favorable to NYCHA, but also on a fundamental commitment to New York City and a fundamental commitment to maintaining these units as low-income, affordable housing. We also said that NYCHA had to remain the operating entity responsible for maintaining these developments on a day-to-day basis, so that from a resident's perspective, nothing changes. The people that you're used to working with in your development, the kind of expectations that you have in terms of knowing who to deal with wouldn't change. It wouldn't be some new private company coming in. And so we wanted to make sure that that was one of the requirements and that it was seamless to each of you. And then lastly, that all of the workers be protected. Obviously, NYCHA has almost 12,000 employees that basically show up every day and work hard to ensure that public housing is preserved in New York City, and it's very important to me and to everyone on this team and to our partners in the unions that they continue to be long-term responsible for doing the important work that they do. I'm happy to say that all of these requirements have been met, and when we get into the Q&A and as I go through the rest of the presentation, we can discuss that more. The transaction has been basically structured in 2 portfolios. We had to create a new entity that would own the buildings in order for us to be able to put public money together with private money, and that's why it's called a mixed financing. HUD requires us to take not just the stimulus money that they provided to us, but also that we would take that stimulus money and put it together with other private dollars in the form of a mixed financing transaction in order for it to be eligible for federalization. And so we had to meet that requirement, and so we had to create new entities in order to own these buildings. So NYCHA is actually selling the buildings into this new entity. We're maintaining ownership of the land outright, and then we created limited partnerships in which the buildings will be acquired by the limited partnership, in which, as I said, NYCHA is the managing partner of the partnership and responsible for operating the developments going forward. Two partnerships. One partnership is a partnership that has the benefits of tax credits in it, and another partnership that didn't require tax credits, and that just has to do with the amount of investment that was required in the different portfolios. The buildings, as I said, will be resold to these partnerships, not the land. The land will basically remain in NYCHA's direct control, and we'll lease the land to the partnerships that own the buildings, so that by definition the buildings have the right to operate on the land that they sit. But it's protection for you, it's protection for NYCHA, that we own the land outright, and it's just one more protection in the deal to ensure that the Public Housing Authority is the owner and controlling agent of these entities. Secondly, that we will put $250 million of money immediately to improve these buildings. You will begin to see that work commence in the next few weeks, with sidewalk sheds going up and other activity mobilizing at your developments to begin the work over the months to come. And we estimate that $212 million of that money is coming directly from Citigroup, City Community Capital, as part of their investment in these developments. And then lastly, we needed to ensure that NYCHA long-term had the right to buy these buildings back at the end of the partnership period, so that once the city received its tax benefits for investing in these buildings, we could dissolve the partnership, reacquire the buildings outright, and that we had that right and that no one else could come in and buy the buildings from us. And so that is part of the development of the agreement as well. Where are we? I kind of took you through a little bit of that already. We got local, at the state level, the governor signed the bill into law, which allowed us to transfer these buildings into the partnership. The State Division of Housing and Community Renewal, which had to approve it, had to look at the transaction and the structure, and had to look at the implication on residents and whether or not it was going to continue to preserve these as public low-income housing. It had to look at all of the elements of this deal and give its blessing that what NYCHA was proposing was indeed going to do that. And so the Department of Housing and Community Renewal at the state level has signed off on this, ensuring that it does all of the things that it is intended to do. And you should know that the legislation that was passed in in Albany, also had a lot of protections in there, explicit language to ensure, again, that these buildings are preserved as low-income housing for the next 75 years and beyond. And HUD today, as I said, signed off on the ACC contract, which allows the buildings to be federalized and for many of the units to receive its own dedicated funding. Where do we end up? We strongly believe we end up with one NYCHA, 334 developments that are federal public housing developments in New York City. No longer 313 of them that are public housing, federal public housing, and 21 that are city and state. All 334 are federal public housing with all of the protections that affords its residents. Additionally, we believe that we will be able to modernize your developments with additional money that we wouldn't have received if we hadn't pursued this mixed financing transaction. In addition to the $108 million that's coming in from the stimulus money, we're raising another $303 million that's going to go to these developments, and that will not only do the capital work that I'm telling you about here today, but also that will fund reserves and other operating costs that will ensure that your developments are well maintained going forward. So it's about modernizing, it's about preserving, and ultimately it's about maintaining them going forward at a standard that we all strive for. One of the other things that this does is that immediately it will qualify 11,743 apartment units for direct federal subsidy. Right now we have within the 21 city and state developments, they're 20,000 plus units, a couple thousand of which have been converted to Section 8, and therefore they have a funding stream attached to them. But 18,000 of them actually have no funding stream, and that's why you heard us talk about the $90 million of operating costs that we don't receive any support for. That was the 18,000 units that don't have any support. Annually, that costs NYCHA about $90 million that we don't receive from anyone. So getting almost 12,000 of those 18,000 units a funding source is a big, big deal. And it basically equates to between $65 and $75 million a year. Every year from now on, we will receive to support the 21 city and state developments. So we wanted 90 million. We didn't quite get all the way there, but we got a long way there in terms of between 65 and 75 million of additional funding. It also, though, the 6,000 units that didn't get the federal funding, we are working with HUD to ensure that they do have a long-term funding stream. And I obviously have had a number of conversations with HUD to give us confidence that they're committed to a full solution for all of these developments, for all of these units, because now that all 21 are in the federal portfolio, we have a real path to ensure that the 6,000 units that don't have funding will also have funding in the next year or two. We know it's going to take us a little time to get there, but HUD is committed to work with us to do it. So we have a plan for all 20,000 plus units in these 21 developments to have funding. And it protects and preserves all of the rights of each and every one of the residents, and that, again, there's no one that will be asked to move out as a result of this. People also want to know that, that it's still going to be for low-income residents. And what we can tell you is that not only will all of your tenancy rights be maintained and you'll not be asked to move for any reason related to the federalization, but when new units come available in these developments because someone moves out, the actual the test on whether they have low-income status actually is going to be tougher than it is today. So going forward, you can't be over 60% of the AMI, the area median income, in order to come into public housing in these developments. So this is actually not only protecting it as low-income housing, but it's actually made the standards around the test even more stringent in terms of people being able to meet that requirement. So we feel very strongly that we've met the commitments that we've put forward. We think that the benefits are clear. It maintains long-term control of these developments by NYCHA, so we're not privatizing. NYCHA is still in control of these developments. It is still public housing, and the public authority that's responsible for ensuring that and the preservation of them will continue to be NYCHA. We will invest $108 million, as I said, from stimulus money, and in addition to the stimulus money, we found a way to leverage that with private and other public money. So in addition to the money that's coming in privately from city community capital, we also were able to get the state to put up $42 million of money for this transaction in modernization money, which was about to expire. And we were able to take cumulative years of modernization money and pull it from the state and put into this opportunity. And that's going into what we're doing as well. So money that wouldn't be available to NYCHA normally is being made available to NYCHA through the federalization transaction. And then ultimately that money will be used to immediately improve the physical condition of the buildings to ensure that we can comply with HUD's standards. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. And I know Mr. Spence will come up and take us through that process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.